Thank you. I would like to thank FIAP for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. Today, the intention of my talk is to talk about the things that have worked in Mexico amidst this wave we've seen in Latin America of withdrawals, populist trends that want to reverse the system. Surprisingly, in Mexico, today we have a reform that happened last December. This is my presentation, okay. This reform made us strengthening the individual account system. This is an opposite situation than in other countries in Latin America. Today, I would like to briefly explain the changes that were implemented in Mexico to strengthen the individual account system. Historical context. This has been previously mentioned today. The system initially was a pay-as-you-go system, defined benefit. In 1997, we transitioned to individual account system with a long transition generation. Everyone that started to contribute under the previous law could continue to choose a DB pension, and those who started working up to July 1997, our pension will be determined based on individual accounts. However, all of us have a savings account for retirement, and DB pensions, the transition generation, are already being paid with an interesting proportion of these accounts paid with the accumulated savings in the individual account. Why did we migrate? The tax cost, the system is not equitable. It provides more subsidies to people with more resources, and of course, demographic changes. The population pyramid, as in most countries present here, is reversing. In Mexico, we had the advantage that the baby boomers came after Europe. We started to see what was going on in Europe. We saw what was adopted in Chile. We said this is the right time, and we were able to transition to the individual account system. We started to see that there were inequalities in the system. There was a risk of using workers' resources for other purposes. We saw that when there was a huge amount of workers that were contributing to this system, the DB system, resources, the excess of resources were not being invested, they were not being saved for future generations, they were being spent and in the current expense of the government. This is a graphic showing how this works. You're all familiar with this, so we skip it. And what we all know, the pension system based on individual accounts, its biggest challenge in those countries in which people have started to retire under this scheme is that it didn't fulfill the expectation of providing a pension similar to the one given under DB. Why? It's a matter of parameters. In Mexico, it was said that there was the wrong parameterization of the system. There were no sufficient contributions. Performance was lower than expected in many cases, and people said that there was a problem with expectations. There were many people, when this was sold, many people said that pensions were going to be even better than with a DB system, which of course didn't happen in most cases. What happened in Mexico? We sought to improve the pensions. 24 years of operations of the saving system for retirement in Mexico, we saw that people that would retire under the law of 1997 were going to receive lower pensions, and very few would reach the weeks of contribution needed to get the minimum pension as the one established in or considered in Dominican Republic. People in Mexico, if their savings for retirement, if their individual account It's not big enough, but they have sufficient weeks of contribution. There's a guaranteed minimum pension. The government supplements those resources to ensure a minimum contribution, additional to the universal pension, which is interesting. I'll explain it in a while. The Social Insurance Act was changed, also the Act on Saving Systems for the Retirement. The first law required 24 years for that retirement, and now it was for 15. It's going to gradually increase. The intention is to incentivize formalizing employment, but considering informality percentage in Mexico, we reached more people with this system. So the number of weeks is reduced. In Mexico, contributions measured in weeks, it was 1,250. It was reduced to 750, and gradually this will increase up to 1,000 weeks in 2031. Speaking of transitional periods, it was mentioned before, 4 to 5 years. In the Netherlands, well, now this is 10 years, transition of 10 years, more or less. Not just for contribution weeks. The main part is that the mandatory employers' contributions were increased. The contribution in Spain was very low, the OECD average. It was clearly insufficient. Most people were going to end up having a minimal contribution instead of having proper pension, and the replacement rate was 30%. Now we're considering increasing the employer's contribution. It's going to be gradually increased from 5%, more or less 5.25% of the salary, to 13.87%. And this, combined with the contribution by each worker, gives 15% of the base salary for contribution. In the context of the pandemic, and to continue to incentivize employment, is going to be done in a very gradual way. The percentage is going to be around 1% every year between 2023 and 2030. In 2021 and 2022, there's not going to be an increase in order to help with the economic recovery. We are considering the possibility that there's a balance in the house accounts. If they have not used the resources for the house, they can add that to their pension, and with that, the replacement rates improve. We'll see a chart in a while, but the replacement rate shifts from more than 100% for people with lower income and up to 70% for people with higher income. Redistribution of the social premium. Under the Mexican law, the government established a small percentage, which was 0.225% of the salary of each worker was included in the individual account as part of the pension. With this reform, the government decided, and this has to do with the fact that it was unequal and people making more money were receiving more, they decided to redistribute this premium so that the contribution of the lower income workers is protected, to protect their jobs, to prevent that employers would fire employees because the premiums were increasing. It was decided that the government was going to subsidize this increase, including this social premium, to help pay the contributions of workers that make less money. And in the case of other type of workers, the employer would pay the whole of the contribution. This way, the use of government resources is distributed to help less favored workers. This is the chart. Workers keep their 1% contribution to the salary. And in the green part, we can see the social premium for workers with lower income. It's becoming more concentrated, and there's a minimum salary. Up to that salary, the employee's contribution is maintained and the government's contribution is reduced. The employee's contribution is increased until we reach more or less four monthly salaries, where the whole increase in the premium will be paid by the employer. With this, we protect the jobs that pay less, but also SMEs that tend to hire them. As I was saying, workers' age is subject to controversy, something really difficult to manage. This is not something that we can change easily, but we can generate awareness that you require years of work, regardless of your age. You require years of work to have a good pension. Here, we change this guaranteed minimum pension. Since contributions are increased, the levels of the minimum pension are improved, and it becomes more flexible in terms of weeks. If you have 750 weeks, you will have a lower pension, even if it's the minimum one, than if you wait longer and you reach 1,250. There's a small incentive to postpone the age of retirement because this will improve the pension significantly. The increase in the replacement rate, as I was saying, pensions used to be 30% of the salary and now is up to 70%. The basic pillar in Mexico, the universal pension is minimum for quality of life. It covers a minimum quality of life. It's given to all Mexicans over 65 years old. This is given if you combine the second pillar, contributive pension, in workers with lower income with a replacement rate over 100%. This decreases, if you combine these pillars, this decreases until you reach 30% for employees with higher, 70% for employees with higher income. Regarding resource allocation, the law is changed to allow a mixed lifelong income. Lifelong income was highly penalizing pensions. Now, the risk of longevity is becoming very significant, and that's why it is allowed to have scheduled retirements with lifelong income so that you can protect your quality of life until you reach retirement. One of the key factors in this reform is precisely that with the reform of 1997, it was seen that it was necessary to review the parameters. We had known for long that we needed to change the parameters that were defined for this system. However, politically, it was always very complicated. It was always the wrong time to discuss it. It was not the time for withdrawals, to increase contributions. Politically, it was always very complicated. Fortunately, last year, we had this possibility, and now I'm going to explain why. But the reform establishes that every 10 years it is mandatory to discuss the parameters to see if they're the right ones or not. And somehow this forces us to constantly review if the population dynamic changes, if health changes, or even financial markets. in order to give the right performances. One of the things that happened, as I was saying, last year in Mexico, with the onset of the pandemic, there was a rumor going on that there are resources, the administration is going to use it, and there was something very interesting that happened. Public opinion, and I'm referring to social media, this is not a survey. Public opinion, every time this rumor started that they are going to take the money from the account, we discovered that people felt their account as theirs. They felt they owned the resources. How did this happen? We think that one of the factors that had an impact was that in Mexico, 10 years ago, there was something that was launched, the withdrawal due to unemployment. And these withdrawals were designed in a way that people can access these resources. They can have an early withdrawal, but just partially under very strict conditions. It is necessary to be unemployed, no withdrawal for the past 5 years, and this withdrawal should not be over 11.5% of the account balance. And with that, we make sure that resources are protected. There were no massive withdrawals. People in the middle of the crisis could access their resources. In case of unemployment, they did it. More than 2 million Mexican workers accessed this withdrawal due to unemployment. But this did not affect the system as a whole, because there are specific conditions only workers that were unemployed could access. So this made workers feel really close to this mechanism. It has been existing for a while. They know that this money is there, they've touched it, they've seen it, and they've given it back to the accounts. But one of the factors is that when you withdraw, your contribution weeks are reduced. But then when you give the resources back, you recover these weeks. So the message conveyed to the workers is, this is your money. Yes, you can use it in case there's a real emergency, but it's yours and it's going to have an impact on you. So it's important for you to give it back. And we've seen a good reaction in this return of resources. We think this is very important in order to create attachment around this account. Today, many things about gender have been mentioned, and informal economy. This reform is focused on formal workers. In Mexico, we know that labor markets change constantly, that we're always trying to find new mechanisms so that people work, particularly people that are self-employed, so that they can make contributions for their retirement. Regarding gender equality, at some point during the reform, it was considered that contribution weeks could be added for a father or a mother that would take care of their children and would go back to the labor market after a year and a half. There was an incentive to go back to the labor market, because we know that casual work affects mainly women. It was not a big tax cost, and it improved the likelihood for women to access a minimum pension at retirement. And the other thing is, we're looking for plans to foster, to encourage self-employed people to make contributions for their retirement. And we didn't consider opt-out systems, but the Afores are making a huge effort to devise plans so that more workers can save independently to create this third pillar. Thank you very much for the invitation.